Ben, Part 2. This is Ben underwater.
How'd you do that?
With my lips. With my finger on the lips.
Okay.
This is a knock-knock joke I do with little kids. I say knock-knock.
Who's there?
A whole lot of water. And while you're saying a whole lot of water, who? I'm doing this thing with your lips.
On my lips or on your lips?
On your lips.
I'm glad we're doing this by internet. So, what's been going on since we last spoke? What's been on your mind?
A couple of things happened in the last year. One thing is I started paying attention to that Jordan Peterson guy. I kind of started paying attention to him when he made the news saying that he wasn't going to be compelled to use people's preferred gender pronouns. And the first time he made the news, I wasn't interested, but a few months later he made the news again, and I decided to check him out, expecting to really dislike what he had to say. But it turned out that he was presenting a conservative viewpoint that I hadn't been familiar with. And although I think he's wrong on some things, I've been getting a lot out of listening to him. So I've been listened to dozens of hours of his YouTube videos, especially his lecture series, The Psychological Significance of the Bible. He's getting hundreds of thousands of young men interested in Christianity.
So can you just give a little top 3 highlights of your favorite gems from Jordan Peterson?
Sure. I think last time we talked, I talked about Paul Tillich's idea of God as being that which you center your life on. If your God is money, then all you do is try to make money. If your God is alcohol, you drink all the time. And hopefully when you're trying to figure out who God is, you'll guess it's money, it won't work out right, then you'll redirect your attention somewhere else. And eventually, hopefully, you'll be centering your life on the most possible good thing will be the center of your life. And I just liked how he put it. He's just like, well, what else are you going to do? Are you going to choose to center your life on something that's not the best thing? He just had a very down-to-earth way of motivating people who feel lost to not feel lost anymore, to be just oh, right, whatever my situation, I can choose to have faith. Faith that it's worth trying to make my day a little bit better and not despair.
Does he give any hints ever about his conception of God?
I mean, he has a clear conception of God as the best possible thing.
Ah.
But he's also clear that our images of God are myths or symbols to help us articulate our beliefs.
He probably doesn't pray, right?
He believes in asking your own brain. For example, what should I do with my life? If you genuinely ask the question, he says it's really common that the answer will pop into your head. And so that's the closest thing that I think he gets to prayer.
And what about worship? I guess he's not worshiping anything.
I would say that he is worshiping the ultimate good, and he does it through daily reminders of what you want to center your life on. He worships the good and he fears the bad. So his self-authoring program, where you write down your ideal good, the best thing that could possibly happen to you, and you also write down the worst thing that could happen to you. I don't know if that counts as worship, but it's focusing your mind on the best possible thing. It's focusing your mind on heaven and focusing your mind on hell and choosing every single day and every moment that you prefer heaven to hell.
So that was your number one sort of highlight. What are the other 2?
When you're trying to do good, focus on a level where you can actually solve problems. So he's critiquing especially young activists who are trying to change the global system, but who can't even clean up their room, make dinner for themselves. And so he's start with making your bed. If you can do that, organize your bedroom. If you can do that, organize your own house, organize your relationships with the people who share your house. And it can feel very humbling to let go of big picture stuff and focus on what's right in front of you. And he says the progress can feel really small from day to day But from month to month, you'll notice that you're solving bigger and bigger problems. And he says from year to year, you'll be astonished at what you can accomplish. So that's something that I'm trying to do. It's hard. Like, I'll still find myself having opinions about federal housing policy, even though my room still feels cluttered. It's hard for me, but it's exactly what I need. And if we look at stories of Jesus in the Bible, he meets people, he solves their problems. He meets a leper, he cures them. So if God is willing to do that, maybe we can be willing to do that too.
That's another excellent point. I have nothing to really critique there. What's the third one?
Incorporate your shadow. Like in my tradition, the Unitarian tradition, we have a very rosy outlook about humans. Like we say, all humans have worth and dignity. And basically, if we can just get the good people in charge, then the world will be a better place. And JP is like, no, we've all got lizard brains. We've all got monkey brains. We've all got the capacity to do great good, and we've got the capacity to do great evil. And that's not news to anybody, but it's something that Unitarian culture hasn't fully incorporated yet. There's a YouTube video by that tattooed pastor, Nadia Bolz-Weber, where she says the reason she chose the Lutherans over the Unitarians because the Lutherans acknowledged her great capacity to do evil, like to eat the last cookie in the cookie jar, even if she knew it wasn't hers. And yeah, in activist circles, there's a lot of pointing the finger, like the problem is those people over there. If we can just get rid of Donald Trump and we get in charge, everything will be fine. And JP is reminding us, no, there'll still be problems. We'll still have our own monkey brains. And a lot of people, I think young men in particular, don't know how to incorporate their anger into their life. And I don't fully know what he means by like saying we need to incorporate the shadow, but we need to honor that part of ourselves. Somehow we need to engage with it. I don't know if that means like playing sports to get out your aggression or what.
They used to call that sublimation. But I think he's going a little bit deeper than that. I think that he's talking about a lack of denial and a sort of humility. Humility is acknowledging reality, and reality is that we are fallen.
Yeah. I think that one stage of the fall happened the first time that one living being ate another living being. When we as life on Earth became predatory and put our own needs above the needs of another being. Overcoming that, for me, would be that life on this planet had no predation and no predatory DNA. Like, not only did we not eat each other, but we didn't even want to. And that would be a total restructuring of the ecosystem. So that's like a long-term project.
So what do you think about Jesus eating fish and stuff like that?
What do I think of him not being vegetarian?
Well, even if he's vegetarian, he's still eating vegetables, which are alive, right?
Yeah.
He would have to hold his breath and not eat anything and not move to avoid killing anything. Even then, his body's probably metabolizing all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
So it's pretty much impossible not to have an impact on other life forms.
Yeah, I think if it had been written like that, like Jainism, I don't know if Jainism already existed back then, where people really tried to not kill any other life forms, like sweeping the path in front of them. I don't think Jainism caught on the way Christianity did. I think that Christianity was written by pretty normal people. It wasn't written by vegetarians, as far as I know. Just like if you read Paul's letters in order, the epistles of Paul, if you read them in order, you see that he gradually took on the norms of the larger culture. So he went from saying that there are no more slaves and masters, we are all equal in one, to saying slaves obey your masters. He gradually took on the patriarchal norms as Christianity became more secure.
No, but you can't just pretend that he naively had this notion that there are no more slaves and then the patriarchy brainwashed him into being pro-slavery. He knew that there were men and women, that there were Jews and Greeks, and that there were slaves and free men, but he was speaking about the liberty that we have because of our faith from the negative ramifications. So if you're a slave, be a slave, obey your master for Christ and in Christ.
Well, yeah, I agree that he still believed that we still had human bodies, and he wasn't saying overthrow society and there are no more slaves. The balance of what he was saying shifted to increasing the importance of women obeying men. In the early church, in the gatherings, my understanding is that there was a lot of equality. There's a different focus from the early days of we're creating these communes where everything's awesome when we get together, to trying to make it work within the larger world. Like in the early letters, he's like, keep your head down, don't cause any trouble, we'll just do our thing on our own, where we don't have slaves or masters.
So what do you make of the Catholic perspective where this earthly life is a pilgrimage between paradise lost and paradise regained in heaven?
I don't have any reason to believe that there was an initial paradise.
What does Jordan Peterson say about that?
Paradise literally means a walled garden. And so he talked about that being a very powerful and important reality for humans, that we need the safety of the walls, but we need the wildness of the garden. And so the image of paradise is a walled garden. That's just psychologically true. That's exactly what humans need. He compared the Garden of Eden with the myth of the Buddha's origin. His father wanted to protect him and make him grow up basically in heaven and paradise, where he had no experience of disease or aging or mean people or ugliness. And then he had this awakening the first time he saw something less than perfection, and he left the garden to go out into the world. So JP thinks it's a very powerful reality that we need this garden, but I don't think he says anything about it being the initial state of people.
Okay, he sees it in terms of the comfort zone that we all have and that we have to leave in order to go on that hero's journey.
Yeah.
So why do you reject the Christian idea that we come from perfection and that we're destined for perfection? Why do you reject that?
Well, there's countlessly infinite possible suppositions that I could have. And to say I rejected that particular one is to give it undue importance.
Do you think the history books give Christianity undue importance too? Have you read the history of Western civilization? To clump Christianity in with the countless infinite possible interpretations of what's going on with ultimate reality, I think, is a bit naive. Sorry, you were going to tell me a little bit about the UU. There was something that happened. Can you just introduce that topic and talk about it?
Totally. So in the 60s, Unitarian Universalists decided to care about trying to end racism. And so that at the annual meeting, they decided to budget, I think, $500,000 for a Black-led organizing group to build up more of a multicultural culture within the Unitarians. And then when a massive budget problem hit, they cut money in all departments. And when they cut money from this, the group protested. It completely disrupted the annual meeting. Most people of color within the Unitarians left, and it was a really traumatic time. Trust was completely gone. And then it took, I think, until the 90s until people were willing to try again. And anti-racism training started, and they were trying to say, like, look at us. We're all white people. We're doing something that is making people of color not feel welcome. And a lot of people were very defensive around that, saying, no, there's nothing wrong with us. We're always completely welcoming of people of color. We don't know why they're not coming. We know we're not the problem. But there were these trainings to try and change their mind about that. And as far as I know, they kind of fizzled out. It didn't really work. And whenever promises would be made at the national level, they would be broken. There wouldn't be follow-through. But one promise that was made was that every job category at national office, at least 20% of people in each job category would be people of color. And they just made that as a policy. It wasn't optional. It had to be like that. And then a year ago, there was a job opening for a type of job. There were only 5 people in this type of job. So this job had to go to a person of color. It was policy. No choice. And there was a candidate who was a person of color, but she did not get the job. And so people were just fed up. And it was such a groundswell of criticism that the person who did the hiring resigned. The president of the Unitarian Association resigned. The top chief operating officer also resigned. So 3 of the top people at national headquarters resigned over this. And they all said, I'm getting out of the way so that the organization can more quickly overcome its white supremacist attitudes. The president only had 4 months to go in his term, or 3 months. So it was mostly a symbolic resignation. Or so we thought, because he was replaced by 3 people, 3 co-presidents who were all people of color. They only had 3 months to finish off the term. But in that time, they started major initiatives. Like they changed role. Okay, it's not going to be 20% people of color in every job title. They might have changed it to 40%. They just said, we're not just going to aim for where it should be. We're going to go so far beyond that it will actually shift the culture. The moderator died of cancer, and he was replaced by 2 people, a person of color and a transgender person. And then when the new president was elected, and it was the first women president that we've ever had. So suddenly we went from being run by baby boomer white men to being run by quite a diverse group of people. But there was so much anger that this process even needed to happen, that there was a lot of defensiveness in reaction to that anger. And I really thought that the backlash against it could be really strong, because there's a lot of power in the traditional demographic. And so I was watching this thinking, okay, I really support the movement to become more multicultural, but I'm also fearful that if it goes too fast, the backlash will delay us for another 50 years. And I think one of the issues was just noticing, okay, once things settle in a bit, who is left in positions of power? Like who does the movement trust to step forward? And they ended up picking people who have been around for a long time, who speak very mildly. You feel at ease listening to them, even as they're challenging you to do better. So I think the people they chose ended up giving everybody confidence that the process was going to be constructive. But I did go through a period of just being like, oh my God, social justice warriors are taking over. Feeling like if I speak my opinion, there's a good chance that I'll be the next person. I'll be the next target of vitriol. Somebody said something like, I'm fully in favor of this work that we're doing. I'm concerned about the process. And someone attacked his character. And because of that, he got a letter from head office saying, we can no longer have your poem on our website because you no longer represent our values in people's minds. And yeah, I thought, oh, who's next? So it was really interesting to see my own denomination no longer being conflict avoidant and trying to grapple with our shadow and trying to, instead of pointing the finger at like the evil politicians, wow, there's suddenly a lot of finger pointing going on within our own denomination. But for me, staying focused on the best possible thing means reminding ourselves of the ultimate goal and living that day to day, not letting our self-righteousness let us treat other people badly, not excluding people in the name of inclusion.
How much would it take in the worst case scenario if UU went off the rails and it was hijacked by imbalanced thinkers? What would be the tipping point for you personally where you just sort of backed off and looked for another denomination?
One fear I've had is that I go for a final interview in Boston before I become a fellowshipped minister. And I've heard that when you go to your final interview, you're basically asked to defend a very left-wing strategy to address anti-racism just to pass the interview. And I decided that, no, I'm totally going to own that I want a politically centrist strategy for addressing anti-racism. right now, I totally trust that that will be acceptable. But if it wasn't acceptable, then I won't get fellowshipped. And then my next step will, I guess, you're allowed to go back a year later. So a year later, I could go back and I could either say, hey, I changed my mind, you guys were right, go lefties. Or I could say, hey, in the last year, I built a huge movement of politically centrist UUs, and I totally stand behind what I said last year. And yeah, there's a bit of a fear that that wouldn't be acceptable. But if I'm not welcomed into fellowship, then I would have to build a career outside of that. I don't see that happening, but if there was going to be a line in the sand, it would be drawn at my final interview. Like, do they accept me or not?
When does that happen?
September 2019.
Can you talk a little bit about your future and the sort of best case scenario?
Totally. I think of the word Catholic, actually, which, if I understand it right, it means both universal and in context. Did I get that right?
It means according to the whole.
So there's both the larger context and there's the local context. That's how I've understood it. And so I really want to be in a denomination that is connected to the larger context and connected to the particular context. So instead of a one-size-fits-all church being planted in 1,000 different neighborhoods, having churches that make sense in their own neighborhood. And I feel like we're really working on this. Like, I'm by no means an unusual person to have this attitude. Totally mainstream. But ideally, I'd like to see our churches showing up in very different ways. Like, we're trying to do multiculturalism by creating a culture that welcomes people of very diverse backgrounds. But we can't just have one church in each city that can be that for all people. We need to figure out how to do multiculturalism within a church, but we also need a very different array of churches and nonprofits and businesses. And we just need it showing up in a lot of different ways.
You're not just going to be another cog in the wheel. You're going to be Ben, and you're going to bring something unique and special to your ministry if you do a UU ministry, right? So can you just focus very heavily on your unique contributions that you think you can make and that you want to make? Can you just end with that sort of vision?
Totally. So I feel like growing up, I put up a huge wall socially, really protected myself. I didn't feel emotionally safe. That's like right now part of my work is trying to integrate having a safe boundary with still feeling connected to people. So mixing vulnerability with safety. So my work will be to try and create a culture that is doing that very well. My experience in the improv dance and improv theater communities helped me to experience a lot of very vibrant ritual, really bringing the spirit in. And my interest in physics, I feel like, really gave me a solid grounding in appreciating structure and analysis. And so I feel like combining those two things is one of my strengths. And I can help really bring to life our rituals, our worship services and experiences, while integrating them, using my analytical sense, integrating our personal growth and our helping people work and spreading the word. Integrating all that into a very vibrant, spiritually alive community.
If you like your worldview, if you think it's swell, if you got some questions, ask me and I'll tell. All you got to do is ask. All you got to do is ask.